Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us through the different time zones around the world. This is our third and final of the spring series on the wisdom of the ages. In the fall, this series will be continued, so please join us again. These talks are sponsored by the Universal Theosophy and Theosophy ULT. There never was a time when humanity was without teachers. In The Ocean of Theosophy by Mr. Judge, he states that man, the most intelligent being in the universe, has never been without a friend, but has a long line of elder teachers, all knowing each other and working for the progress of the less progressed. They leave the light of their work for humanity. And this light is the light of our own potential. Today, we draw nearer to the ideas of this light and potential, the evolution and the harmonizing of our instruments to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood and sisterhood. Our talks today on the three lights of the voice of the silence, the Upanishads, and the Dhammapada. We begin with Ava and the voice of the silence.
Now you can hear me. So welcome and thank you so much for making this possible, Jerry. And we also like to say that whatever we are sharing tonight is a joint effort from our study class here in Malmö. So The Voice of the Silence was published in 1889. And let's see how I move the slide to the next one. Anyone can help me with that? Oh, sorry. Go back. So what it does, The Voice of the Silence, it strikes a keynote that is crucial to understanding all the other theosophical literature, because it's a keynote of the heart. And its poetry awakens our soul memory. And even if we don't understand all the different terms in the beginning, there is something that resonates deep within us. And this, you could say, start a process of initiation. And it becomes a very powerful meeting with ourselves when we study The Voice of the Silence. It also invites us to the current of all previous and future enlightened beings. So everyone that has walked the path before us and everyone that is going to walk the path after us, this current is sometimes called the wall of protection, the guardian wall. And we can be sure that when we do this kind of study, we get help from all these different beings. We think this is a very good symbol for the voice of the silence, a blurred white point within a dark background. And it is the way it is from the beginning. It starts to whisper when we start to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of life? What am I here for? Where am I coming from? Where I'm going to? And we know that it's very hard to discern this voice in everyday life. It's all the stress of the personal life, and it's all the global stress, the challenges that is going on at the moment. All these become like static noise, or you could say modifications of our minds that makes us sort of more deaf to the voice of the silence within. Now, the voice of the silence, as we studied here in Sweden, we try to put an emphasis on the practical aspect. How can it be used in everyday life? So the three fragments, we have given it the keywords seek, find, and share. And if we start with fragment 1, seek, it's kind of preparation. We move from pratyahara, and pratyahara is when we're totally controlled by the senses. A practical example, I walk by Starbucks cafe, I feel the scent of a nice coffee smell, and I tell myself, oh, I need a coffee. And then, you know, half a minute later, a few seconds later, I say, well, hey, I don't even drink coffee. So the senses are very powerful, you know, trying to control us. And we have to move from that state of mind to what we call dharana, which is the first step in meditation, to try and concentrate, and to concentrate in the mind so it becomes one-pointed, which can bring us into the here and now more clearly. And of course, what is it that we are seeking? We have to ask ourselves, who am I? And we all know from the teachings that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. But why are we not able to remember that in everyday life? What is the main obstacle that we cannot hear the voice of the silence? Well, on page 2, there comes a very important lines of the first fragment. The mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. Here we have 3 components. We have the mind, we have the slayer, and we have the real. So let's try and look at the mind. The mind has, as we've been told, it is the tool for the consciousness. It's the instrument for the soul to perceive reality on different levels. And it opens up different vistas depending on our point of identification. Say we are at the personal point of identification. I am my persona. If all I identify with is my own personality, we get access to a very limited aspect of the mind. A mind that points out separateness, that gives rise to the global conditions that we have today. When we expand our point of identification, and we see that we are something more than the personality, we are that golden thread of the individuality that moves from the beginning of life to the end and to the next and to the next. We are eternal beings. That gives rise to the feeling of I am I. No matter how much my body changed, my mind changed, my thought changed, I'm still the same. And this expands further into the universal perspective of the mind, where it is I am. And so we can see that the spiritual path depends on our understanding and cultivating of the mind. This is very nicely put in the Voice of the Silence, the 3 halls. We have the hall of ignorance, which we can correspond to our personal limited view or area of the mind. Then we have the hall of learning, when we penetrate into a greater perspective, where the personal is more and more moving to the individuality. And then we have the hall of wisdom, where the individuality is more realized, and we touch upon the universal. And to make this practical for an everyday use, we can also correspond them to these 4 major states of consciousness. The waking state, where we are very focused in our personal sphere. The dreaming, where all of a sudden we see that time is not the same. We expand our consciousness. And then the dreamless sleep, where we're sitting at the god of the banquets of the god, the table of the gods, and we get nourishment. Now the problem is, how do I move from the waking state into the dreaming state and then to the dreamless state and come back with inspiration from the dreamless state down through the dreaming into the waking state? For this, we need to practice what is called the witness position. So here comes a very simple practice that we do in our group here in Sweden. Before going to sleep, strengthen the witness position. In the wonderful talk we heard on the first Saturday on Pythagoras' teachings, we heard about the same thing, making a review of the day. But we would add to it, let's try and do it from a neutral position. So we don't say this is good or this is bad. We are there as a silent watcher. We don't want to create new modifications of the mind. We move on to fragment 2, where the key word is find. It's the phase of discovery. where we move from concentration or dharana into contemplation. We have to be able to prolong our concentration into contemplation. And everyone who has studied some metaphysical ideas know that we need a focus of the mind to stay put on what we are studying, but we also have to contemplate. We have to dwell upon the ideas for them to become realities for ourselves. So we have to move from that state and to bring in the contemplative state into everyday life. And the first thing that we find in the second fragment is that the path has two aspects, liberation and renunciation. And whether it's going to be liberation or renunciation depends on the motive with which we set off on the path. The path is one disciple, yet in the end twofold. Marked are its stages by 4 and 7 portals. At one end, bliss immediate, and at the other, bliss deferred. Both are of merit, the reward. The choice is thine. So let's look at the stage number 1, the 4 portals. Everyone has to go through this. In one sense, if we look at it in a micro perspective, we have to be able to maintain the witness position, which is a process of moving from the waking. When the body falls asleep, we need to stay awake. We need to move through these different states of consciousness with an unaltered conscious awareness. Everyone has to do that. We have to our aid what is here symbolized with the 7 globes, but here they represent the 7 parameters. The 7 parameters are there to stabilize the witness position and to reinforce the compassionate attitude. Now, a being who has been able to do this, and this is a formula, so you repeat it on each of the rupa planes or the form planes. And when the 4 rupa planes have been, you could say, mastered, that you can transition through them, then you could say that you have become an enlightened being, and you're definitely entitled to a bliss immediate. But now the second stage is putting an emphasis on the 7 portals. In the second stage, you have to go through the same process of being able to maintain the witness position through the different states, through the different rupa planes. But now you are renouncing the bliss immediate to receive a bliss deferred, because you have realized that you cannot experience bliss if not all sentient beings are also experience the same thing. So you stay on to be a conscious helper in nature. And then you can see that here the parameters become an aid that you can use as occult forces to be able to help and navigate through the different areas of the different states of consciousness, to be able to be of service to all sentient beings. So Bodhisattva of compassion has the capacity to transcend both samsara and nirvana. Samsara, all the desires that comes with Mayavic existence, but also nirvana and the desire for the bliss for individual salvation. So to sum it up, liberation, you could say, is becoming aware of the timeless in time. But renunciation is the ability to bring back the timeless as an unfoldment in time in order to be of service. And here I will ask Laura to read the Kuan Yin Pledge.
Thank you, Eva. Never will I seek nor receive private individual salvation. Never will I enter into final peace alone, but forever and everywhere will I live and strive for the redemption of every sentient being throughout the world from the bonds of conditioned existence.
Thank you, Laura. And this is really the keynote, isn't it, in the whole book of The Voice of the Silence. And as a practice, we can take as a habit to reinforce our pledge and let it be the last thought before going to sleep, and also be the first thought when you wake up. And what does this really imply? Well, it means that we create a continuity of motivation, a continuity that we will then carry with us from one life to the next life. We know how the last thought before passing away from this body is going to determine the after-death state and also the calibration for the next incarnation. So it's a good practice to set up. And this moves us into the fragment number 3, where share is the key word. What is the fun in gaining wisdom if there's no one to share it with? Self-realization is a process. It's each of those moments when we are capable of acting for and as the self of all living beings. In the beginning, we only realize it for a few seconds or maybe minutes at a time, but gradually we are able to move from the state of contemplation into the realization. Samadhi means to bring together, and this is what we do in the 3rd fragment. Point out a way, however dimly and lost among the host, as does the evening star, to those who tread their path in darkness. One of the more beautiful statements in the voice, which also means that we are always both students and teachers at the same time. And this is an absolute necessity for the one life current to flow. If we focus just on the student aspect or just on the teacher aspect, we get stuck in either of them. There has to be this fluidity to always be both at the same time. Now, what we want to share is our knowledge of the path. And it says in the voice of the silence that we cannot become the path. We cannot walk the path until we have become the path itself. So one way of viewing the path is to view it as a state of consciousness. So whenever we in our intent or aspiration or in practice manage to act for and as the self, we will be in that state of consciousness. The treading of the path is associated with the cultivation of virtues. And virtues, or the paramitas, is one of the main topics of the 3rd fragment. Now, a virtue, Rohit Mehta says in his book Creative Silence, constitutes right relationship between the whole and the part. We have to, you could say, align the universal point of identification with the individual point of identification and the personal point of identification. So practicing the paramitas, you could say, is a calibration of our being to being in capital letters. Now, paramitas are said to be practiced with the background of the unmanifested. What does that mean? We know that different virtues, different rules in different traditions mainly says, don't do this, don't do that, etc. This is not the case with the paramitas. The paramitas are occult forces that has their source in our innermost being, in our heart, in the 7 Dhyani Buddhic aspects within ourselves. So when we practice the paramitas from that background of the unmanifested, it will be a gradual, you could say, evolutionary process within us. We know how in Theosophy there are not very many rules, apart from trying to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood, but it's left up to the individual to grow at its own pace. So look at the paramita as an occult force. And this is extremely important. It's not just something that we are told from the outside. We are now going to awaken something from within. And we can see that the moment we take the Kuan Yin pledge, our karma intensifies, just like Mabel Collins tells us in Light on the Path. And everything starts to move very much quicker than before. And it initiates a process of transformation, because we cannot start to activate these occult forces without it's going to put us into transformation. So, for example, dana, as we know, is the key of charity and love immortal. And what this occult force does when we try and practice it, it will bring up everything that is not compatible to it, to the surface. So we can see it, become aware of it, conscious of it, and start to work with it. We have asked the divine witness within ourselves to spread its light in every dark corner of our being, so everything can come up to the surface and being transformed. And this is what happens. I don't know about you guys, but, trying to be compassionate, very often one finds oneself, growling or complaining, being bitchy, being criticizing. And the more that you activate the love aspect, the more this is going to work this way up. So it's actually a very positive sign. It's reassuring that it's actually working. Shila, the key of harmony in thought, word, and deed, is probably one of the most difficult to get in line. Just take, for example, and think on a day in your own life, how often do you manage to get a harmony of thought, word, and deed? I would say it's more difficult than walking a tightrope over a crevice like this. Then we come to Shanti, patience sweet that naught can ruffle. I don't think I know any old-timers in Theosophy that doesn't struggle with this parameter, especially. It is almost like when we go into work with ourselves, we become impatient because nothing is happening quick enough. But we often see Shanti as the opposite of impatience, which we can all recognize in ourselves. But actually, Shanti is so much more. Patience means the ability to stay in the witness position, to not let the mind run riot into the future or into the past, but to stay here and now in order to be able to relate to each given situation that we are presented with in everyday life. Then comes the most tricky one, viraga, indifference to pleasure and to pain, transcend likes and dislike. I would like you to take a moment and just think, just this day from you woke up, some of you haven't been awake for so many hours like we have on this side of Globe D, but just think about it. Have you already had your likes and dislikes? I want my coffee this way, I don't want it that way. I want this in my sandwich, I don't want that. I like this, I don't like that. Life is totally full of it. It's all the modifications of the mind. Does it mean that we shouldn't experience pleasure or pain? Of course not. We're not going to be some kind of AI robotic theosophist, but we're not going to cling to it. We're not going to caught in that web. So we can see that viraga is also a necessary basis for dana, shila, and shanti. How we will be able to keep our compassionate attitude, or to be able to have word, thought, and action in line with each other, or patience, if we don't have transcended our biases of likes and dislikes. And we think that this is why Mr. Wadhya is putting such a strong emphasis on viraga. Once we have kind of liberated the divine energy from all our likes and dislikes, from all the personal desires, then that energy is freed up and is trying now to fight its way up to supernal truth. And of course, then it's very important that we know how to direct it. So we can direct it towards dhyana, whose golden gate once open leads the nodule towards the realm of Sat Eternal and its ceaseless contemplation. So here, to be in this meditative state, where we bring in the witness position and the compassionate presence in everyday life, is what dhyana is about. And dhyana is something that we can practice then, in very small inklings. There is a difference between when you and I practice it, which are from moment to moment, and when an enlightened being has realized it, of course. But the more we can do this, we will also mirror back prajna, which is the universal divine wisdom. And this is the key to which makes of man a god, creating him a bodhisattva son of the Dhyanis. And this we do over and over again. We practice until we self-realize it. One practice for this that Annelies in our group often is advising us to do is to focus on one parameter for each day of the week, just to get into the habit, just to create the pattern in the mind, so that the imprint will be something that we carry with us also into the next life. And I would like you, if you could read this, please, Laura.
Yes, thank you. The voice of the silence. Compassion is no attribute. It is the law of laws, eternal harmony, Alaya's self, a shoreless universal essence, the light of everlasting right and the fitness of all things, the law of love eternal. The more thou dost become one with it, thy being melted in its being, the more thy soul unites with that which is, the more thou wilt become compassion absolute.
Thank you, Laura. And here are just the references that we have mainly used for preparing this talk. We can especially recommend the Creative Silence if you're not yet familiar with it, which are commentaries by Rohit Mehta on the voice of the silence, which gives a slightly different perspective maybe than we are used to, but that is very sort of expanding to the mind and the understanding of it. So we like to say thank you for listening, and we leave it on to the next presenter.